Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Ask the Expert session on employee document management, where we'll be talking about the employee document management bulk upload. Just give an introduction. I'm Michael Sheridan. I'm from the HR business unit here at ServiceNow, typically interfacing with HR service delivery deployments. And I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Apani. If you could give a quick introduction, Apani.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name's Apani Baksh. I'm part of the HR product management team alongside Michael. I primarily focus on our UK and European region, working with our customers around product adoption and capturing feedback and insights to drive back into our business unit and continually enhance our product.
So just a quick note on the agenda. What we plan on covering today is an introduction to employee document management. So for those who are new to the product, we want to give insight on what the product is for, what it does, etc. We'll then talk about some of the key concepts of employee document management, which are important to know for that bulk import because we're going to leverage those key concepts. And then last but certainly not least, the bulk of the conversation is going to be around that bulk import, what that bulk import looks like, how do we configure it, what are some of the configurations, and how it's used.
So we're going to start with just, setting a baseline around employee document management, recognizing that some of you guys on the phone may not be as familiar with this newer element to our overall HR offering. In ServiceNow's eyes, we see employee document management as a way to provide storage space, an e-filing system, for lack of a better word, a way in which we can centralize documents that relate to an employee against their HR profile within ServiceNow. And this ultimately provides easy access and retrieval of those documents when required, both for HR and for the employee at times. And it allows us also to define who can actually access and view these often sensitive documents and set rules around this for when you need to purge those documents and the data that you may have retained around that. Next slide. Thank you. So why ServiceNow for EDM? It's interesting, and we'll talk a lot about EDM. That's just the acronym that we use internally. But at ServiceNow, we saw this really as a natural component or enhancement to our overall HR service delivery offering. It's interesting, in many respects, we were led to this through many requests and a lot of interest from our existing customer base. If you consider, employee service delivery as a whole, we're providing a means for employees to interact with HR and centralize the way in which they find information, view knowledge articles, interact and raise cases when they need to, that is routed to the relevant HR teams and individuals. They're also guided through these key moments that matter. And through many of these interactions, we're capturing documents that pertain to that life cycle event, that key moment, or that request made on behalf of that employee. And so with that, we saw an opportunity to centralize how we could capture those documents when they are created, manage and maintain that information effectively, and as I mentioned earlier, purging that at the appropriate period. This overall supports our proposition around HR service delivery, and it allows our customers to have one place to not only provide service delivery to their employees, but also manage these documents surrounding this. So we're going to cover a number of key concepts that relate to our version and our vision of employee document management. Keeping in mind as well, and something that is probably just good to set context around up front, we talk about employee document management, and it really is with that idea around employee being at the center of managing these documents and the whole purpose of this product. So with that, one of the things that we heard was, for HR, it's an onerous task at times to access the documents that they've retained in their own, additional tools, whether that's a third-party cloud system, whether that's literally a paper document. And so being able to centralize that within ServiceNow and simply identify which documents employees should be able to access on their own behalf was a great way to minimize the double handling of those documents and streamline employee access. And we've done that through the Employee Service Center. So allowing HR to simply tick and identify against certain documents or document types what should be accessible via that Employee's Service Center. Another key element when we talk about employee document management, especially when you're looking at setting this up, is around the security policies that underpin each of these different documents that you might be retaining. What we've done is to give you a really simple way to configure the read, write, and authorization of purging of these documents. So you're able to set specific security policies that pertain to specific documents, identifying who can access what, who can read what, and ultimately who can, authorize it being deleted forever. In addition, so we've talked about security, but the other element around this is as you retain these documents, how you're effectively aligning with, say, corporate policy or even local or federal legislation that might define how long you actually have to retain these documents. And so what we heard was that depending on certain jurisdictions, certain countries that a country may operate in, will define different types or lengths of retention periods. And so what ServiceNow did was to allow you to apply multiple retention policies per document, depending on certain criteria based on different elements. And you can see a great example here, and Mike's going to walk through a demo of this later as well. Once that retention policy has come to its end, you also have the ability to then have ServiceNow automatically purge those documents. So we're really taking the burden off HR. We're taking the burden off them to maintain and to continue to be aware of what might be coming up to that end of retention period. And now we can proactively notify HR if a document is or should be purged in the upcoming weeks. We can provide notifications and we can also request authorization just to ensure that there is that human element in between. One other key area which was really a request that came from our customer base was around certain circumstances or situations where when managing documents, you may need to retain or apply what we term a legal hold based on certain litigation or legal action that may be occurring at that particular point in time. As such, you may want to ensure that those documents are not necessarily purged despite the purging rule until that legal action or case has been closed. What you can see here is the ability not only to apply a legal hold on an employee's profile, which will then apply a hold to all documents in relation to that employee, or alternatively, for example, if it was an audit of the organization and you were required to legally hold all documents of a certain type, you could do that as well. And that will apply then across all employee profiles that have a certain type of document retained against it. So really good feature that can help to mitigate any risk of losing critical documents that are required as part of an ongoing action. So we've talked about a number of things that ultimately make up employee document management in our eyes and help to support the security of those documents. One other element that we haven't yet talked about is metadata. And that's more so around allowing our HR agents and our HR teams to find documents quickly and easily. We're talking about potentially, tens to hundreds of documents across an employee's lifetime at an organization. And when looking for certain types of documents based on a request or a particular case that is raised, metadata can help you to easily access and search for that in a far more simplistic manner.
Well, thank you for that information, Apani. Great information. So for the audience, the item we're going to get into next is the employee document management bulk import. So our goal is a centralized document. So as many of you know, in London, we introduced the concept of employee document management, which included the features of manually moving these documents from cases or tasks to an employee repository. So outside of automation, there's a certain circumstance where I wanted to move a document from a employee relations case to their repository, I can manually move that. The other feature that London introduced was to automatically move documents from cases. So depending on the HR service, we can choose to select what kind of document type we wanted to append to that document. And then when the case was closed, automatically move that into the employee repository. So if you know, as of Madrid, we introduced the bulk upload functionality, which is the ability for a use case like to upload scanned documents. So as it currently exists, we don't have a way to scan right into ServiceNow. So the typical use case is to have those scanned documents exist in a repository. That repository could be either a third-party cloud. That repository could be a local drive, on our mid server, for example. And then from there, we can bulk import those files into employee document management. So those are the current use cases as of Madrid, how we can move those documents. Bulk import manually and automatically on the closure of a case. Before I get into more of the details, since we're kind of transitioning from the key elements of EDM, are there any questions, Lisa, that have come up in the chat or on the Google Hangout up to this point?
Yeah, so we had someone say it would be great to know if there's a bulk export feature. The HR department would sometimes like to provide an employee folder upon request.
And we do have the ability to extract files from those document repositories. So that is a feature that you could leverage. So it's separate from the bulk import, but by all means, we could export those documents for for those legal reasons if need be.
Okay, great.
Any other questions?
Not yet, but let's see what else comes up.
Awesome. Okay, so what are these features that we're introducing with bulk import? Party cloud-based storage or a local network directly to employee document management. And as we go on to the next slides, I'll give some pros and cons for each depending on your use case. Employee documents located within HR service delivery makes administration a little bit easier. So, in the past, when we had to investigate an employee or investigate a certain scenario that involved an employee and maybe some corrective actions that were taken, we have to traverse through cases and tasks and, maybe even outside of the application, but we're traversing through ServiceNow to try to gather all of that information. Where now employee document management centralizes that to where I have all of those documents in one place. And, to Apani's point earlier about that legal hold is then now if there's a circumstance where we have to hold documents because of some litigation or an investigation or something of that nature, we can hold those documents. They're all in one place. We're not traversing. So it really makes that administration or even that investigation that much simpler. And then we can consolidate all those documents and maintain over the duration of the employees over their employment. So again, based on those purging rules or those retention policies, we could hold them for, legally what we're bound to hold those for, again, outside of the circumstances where we're where we're using legal holds. One thing I want to mention as well is that we leverage orchestration and integration hub, as you've seen in the employee document management documentation on the doc site. You are entitled to orchestration by way of employee document management. So not that it requires a separate subscription, but by virtue of EDM, you can leverage orchestration for the purposes of employee document management bulk imports. So the current document repository, so that's how are you holding your documents today? So currently we're seeing two different variations. We're seeing a third-party cloud. So in my example today, in my demonstration, you'll see where I'm using Box in order to retrieve some files. But another customer may have a use case to where they're using OneDrive or another third-party cloud to get those documents. The other use case is the local file storage. So typically we're seeing customers importing those files by way of their mid server. So hopefully there's a question that comes up to say, well, why should I use one or the other? And there are some pros and cons for each. With a third-party cloud drive, we can drill directly into the directory. So meaning that if we had a directory that was called users, and within that users directory, it had subfolders of, Mike Sheridan, and all the rest of the employees. By way of the URL connection or the third-party cloud, we can drill into that root directory. So it's not going to traverse through all of the users in those subdirectories. So if I connect to the user directory, it's not going to automatically drill into Mike's, Apani's, or anybody else's directory. So that's one of the differences between the local file storage. With the local file storage, so when we're bringing them in by way of mid-tier, we can traverse those subdirectories. So if it's a matter of we have a directory of users, within that users directory, there's a subdirectory of Mike, a subdirectory of Apani, we can traverse those through the application in order to get those additional documents. So the bulk of it is that with the third-party cloud, I'm going straight to the directory. If all of the company's employee files are in that one directory, that's beautiful. It doesn't cause us any grief. If there are subdirectories, then we may look into that local file storage. And this is what we're seeing more customers do, that they're storing their scanned documents, they're storing their documents from other applications into that local file storage, and then using the bulk import to go from that local file storage into the employee document management repository. So hopefully I'll address some questions. How does this feature work? So again, first introduced in Madrid, it works from those local file systems or from that third-party cloud application. Once we install the employee document management or once we activate it, we have to say what kind of import it's going to be. Is it going to be a local or cloud? Because then we're going to have additional configurations that we're going to have to do. If it's from the local, we're going to have to specify the mid server, the SSH, or any other protocol that we're going to use to transfer files in that specific configuration, where we wouldn't see the same for a cloud URL. We're then going to document our import map. So we're going to want to map attributes from that file to what we expect in ServiceNow. So we may map any file name that has NDA to a non-disclosure agreement document type. So that's part of our configuration, which I'll go through as we go through the demonstration. And then I'll specify my import sources. So we use verify files. We use a process to create those staging records based on those files. And then lastly, we'll do a capture. The capture is what actually grabs the file from the external source and then brings it into the employee document management repository. And last I mentioned about the UI actions, and those are the UI actions I'll show during the demonstration, where we're going to verify the directory structure, we're going to stage the files, and then ultimately we're going to capture the files. All right, I'll pause at this point. Are there any questions that that have been raised, Lisa?
No questions yet.
Okay.
We can always have, I posted the link that if any users have questions later, the link that was provided is for on the community specifically for this event. And both Apani and Michael will always be able to answer them at any time after this broadcast.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa.
Mhm.
So again, just to give a high level employee document management import process. So again, from the local file storage from the third-party cloud, our first step is to prepare the files in import source. So if we have files that really have no naming convention, have special characters in the file name, we're going to want to do some pre-work in order to make the import of the employee documents a little bit simpler. So prepare files that's part of that. If we already have a structure that we're following, it makes that it makes that much easier for the import process when we're talking about mapping files and matching attributes of those files. Our next step is to then create a bulk import configuration. So I'm going to create my source, I'm going to create my verify, I'm going to create my staging if need be. Typically, we're going to copy that from the examples that have been given, but that would be our next step, is to create that bulk import configuration. Next, we're going to add the import source records, which is whether that be by way of that local file storage or that third-party cloud. And then last, before we start the import, is add those import mapping records. So where we're bringing over those attributes, we're going to want to, traverse from an NDA into a non-disclosure agreement. So we're going to want to work out all of those details so the document types that we want to pull in are going into the correct document type within employee document management.
Michael, can an HR admin carry out this import process?
By way of the employee document management roles. So there are separate roles specific for employee document management where you're going to want to append those individuals who you want with those duties with those employee document management roles. A great question, though. Okay, so going along with our steps, and again, I'll walk through these to show you what these look like within the application. So we're going to prepare our files in import source. So I'm going to configure the access to the source repository. So for URL-based files, it's typical that we're using OAuth, things of that nature. We can grab the token to access those files, and these are all pieces of information that we're going to include within our employee document management source configuration. The cloud files can use the mid server and typically leverage those SSH configuration to access files. So again, part of our preparation for our document import. And then we could tag or name files that we want to import. And this is part of that, that file pre-work that we're going to do if there's not a naming convention, if there's no way to identify the individuals by way of the file name or identify what document type it is. So these are some of the pre-work some of the tasks that we're going to do as pre-work for the bulk import. Some of the tag or file names that you'll want to import include things like the employee. So, the ServiceNow ID, which is, a Michael.Sheridan, for example. The document type is something we're going to want to make sure that we're mapping so so it's importing into the correct document type within EDM. The file name, so it could be visible as a ServiceNow attachment. Again, some things to think about as we're talking about attachments is that if your organization has any limitations on attachment types. So, we have a system property from a platform perspective. So if you're seeing that you're wanting to import files that have, I would say, non-standard file extensions and they're not coming in or you're seeing issues, this could be something to check. From a platform perspective, are you not allowing those type of documents? And then the file, it can contain information in different ways. So we can have attributes or tags on those files that we can grab in order to identify what kind of file it is, or what kind of document type it is. And then we could use a directory path as well. So using some of the features and some of the configurations of the import, such as regex and things of that nature, we can grab more information based on any of those attributes or meta tags. So our next step would be then to create that bulk import configuration. So what we're doing is filling in fields like host name and the source directory for import. Again, this is something I'll walk through and show you in the demonstration. And then the credential for access. So are we using OAuth? Are we using basic authentication? Are we using SSH or some other method, which depending on the type of import we're using, local or third-party cloud, would dictate what protocol we're going to use or what credentials we're going to use. And then we have this concept of staging records status. So when we stage the records, do we want them as ready? Do we want them as draft? So again, another simple configuration that we'll go through as I traverse through the demonstration. So our next step would be the add import source records. So we have several integration points that we're using. In my example, I'm leveraging the flow designer in order to have actions to validate, have actions to look up the file, and have actions to capture. And I won't get into the fine ones and zeros of the scripting of those, but I'll show an example maybe of the capture action in the flow designer so you can see how that works. So essentially, those are the mechanisms that are actually reaching out to see what's in the directory, are reaching out to look at the file, and ultimately to capture that information and the file and bring it over into ServiceNow. So one thing to note is that the import source code can be written and deployed as a flow action, a flow sub action. We can use workflow, and we could use a ServiceNow script or JavaScript. So just so you're aware of the methods that we can use, where what you see in the demonstration is just using that using the flow. So our next step is then to add import mapping records. So this is the import process that's going to convert and parses that information that we've configured. So it's going to use regex to get the first name dot last name as the file name, or it's going to use our configuration to say, well, when it's got NDA within the file name, we know that that's going to translate to non-disclosure agreement document type in ServiceNow. So again, we're translating those values, and when I say translating, it's not by way of language. It's by translating. M Sheridan is going to translate to Michael.Sheridan, as an example. And one thing that we have, additional functionality we have on that import mapping is the source value can be filtered. So if we want to filter it just by a file type, so we only want to pull in PDFs. And that may be your use case, we can use that import configuration to filter by the source. So if there are no questions, I'd like to show you what this looks like in the live and in the application where I'm going to perform an import.
Not seeing any questions yet.
Okay, let me expand this a little bit. So where I'm at now is the bulk import configuration for employee document management. And I've created my own example box cloud import configuration. And I'm just going to traverse here to my box site so you can see where I have this Michael Sheridan verification document and a Michael Sheridan NDA document that I want to use bulk import to connect to this third-party cloud application in order to pull in the documents. So just that you understand that I don't have these records staged and 100 transparency, I'm going to open my profile so you can see that I have no employee document management or no employee document management files appended to my HR profile. So I'm just going to pull up my HR profile, and here I have visibility into any employee document management files that are specific to my HR profile. So as you can see, there are none. So I'm going to go back to my bulk import, and we'll take a look at my configuration. So in my configuration, I have my URL to my box 8. I have the source type of what am I going to use? Am I using a local drive to import these files, or am I using a URL? In my case, I'm using box, so I'm using the URL. I could additionally log any of the mappings of my import mappings to help troubleshoot. So document types aren't coming over as they are expected. When I log the mapping, then I could have visibility into seeing what's going on, from a log perspective. I have the ability to configure how I want the staging record to be created when it's when I run the staging. So do I want it in draft, or do I want it as ready? In order to run the start capture job, it has to be at the ready. So, given your use case, if you want to, have it as draft, review it, then move your stage documents to ready. But be that as it may, it's a configuration that you could use to make that a little bit simpler. For my particular mapping, I'm using a credential alias, and I just named it. This is my box example credential. I'm not going to pull up those credentials due to sensitivity, but I'll show how I configured those to see, so you can see what it looks like. So what I'm going to do is just jump back here so you could see a example credential. So I've created this different sample credential, and what I want to show here, the purpose is so you can see how I could select what protocol I'm going to use. So with this new sample credential, I want to create a credential for this alias, and then these are my choices. So again, typically SSH we see with the local method of bulk import. We're seeing OAuth, basic auth credentials for connecting to a third-party cloud. Just to give you, some insight of the different protocols that we're using for authentication or credentials as part of the employee document management configuration. So going back to my my cloud box import, these are the UI actions I referred to earlier, to where we can start that verify configuration job. We can run a staging job in order to get the information of those files and to stage them. And then ultimately for our capture job, we're actually pulling that those files over. Again, these are from our UI actions that are going to invoke the jobs. And those jobs that we're invoking are what you'll see here below. So I have an example file lookup for my staging part of the employee document management. I have an example directory lookup for the verify portion of my employee document management import. And then ultimately I have a capture job, and it's the example file capture that I'm using in order to bring the file over. All of these are actions within my my flow designer configuration based on what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to verify, I'm trying to stage the file, and ultimately I'm capturing the file. My next part of the configuration are those elements to where I'm mapping over. So just as an example, and I'm not using David Liu in any of my demonstration data, but here's where we want to, where the source element had David L, we want to replace it with David.Liu. So here's some of the flexibility we have as part of that import map. So if there's part of the file name that I want to use regex in order to do some conversions, I could use regex as part of a file name mapped element. My doc type, so I could use meta tags in order to determine what my doc type is. So within my meta tags of my document, some of those attributes may point to it's a non-disclosure agreement, or it's a transcript that it mentions something about school. This is just another example where I statically map school with transcripts. And then we have some other configurations. So for my mapped element of item, the source is an ID. For my employee, I'm using the meta owner, and then I'm using some variables in order to set those values. So this is kind of showing some of the use cases where it's more simpler, where I have that formatted file structure, that file naming, to where I may not have to lean on regex or some of those other tactics in order to, ultimately get the file name that I desire with a first dot last. So again, an important part of our employee document management, based on what we're trying to bring over, or what information we want to traverse from the source element to the mapped element. All right, my next step is I want to show you a little bit what this looks like in the Flow Designer before I actually go through the import.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
We got two more. If this runs ServiceNow Cloud to Box Cloud, does this mean I can also accomplish this from a phone? As long as I can drop docs into Box from my phone, I could then bulk import them from my phone as well?
That would not be possible from your phone.
No.
So anything that runs on employee document management is really running from the server, not from any local node, meaning my workstation, and certainly not the phone.
Okay, one more question. Was there anything special to be done on the Box site to get OAuth, or was it just the Box login credentials?
It's could be just the Box login credentials, but every use case could be different. Mine was a little bit simpler. It was a personal Box site that I used in order to grab those credentials, but that wouldn't be the same for everybody. So OAuth is what's typical. I see others using basic auth. Your case may warrant one or the other or something different. So it really depends on your use case, but more of the common for Box is the OAuth. And the OAuth configuration specifically is something that's detailed in the employee document management documentation as well.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is pull up my actions, and they're all prefixed with example, but these are the actions that are being called to by the employee document management. So you saw where I had the example directory lookup, I had the example file capture, and I had the example file lookup. And I can open, just the example file capture just to show you what that looks like. So I have my input variables, so the request, and I have a string, and then we have some script steps. What's the endpoint? What's the file name? What's the record reference? And then if I go down further, I have things like items affected. So this is how we know how many documents we have. So as part of the bulk import, these are all things that we may want to tailor to our configuration depending on what we're trying to bring over. But just an example, in the file capture step, we have the inputs, we have a script step, we have a rest step. At step 3, another script step, and then ultimately we have the outputs of the Flow Designer action. So this is really the moving parts, if you will, the engine of employee document management, which is really making that effort to go out there to look at the directory structure, is going out there to look at the files, and ultimately going out to your repository, whether that be local or third-party cloud, to pull the files in. I didn't get into much of the code, so hopefully I didn't scare anybody away, but I just wanted to give you some insight so you understand the working mechanism, at least in this example, for employee document management. So did that raise any questions from anybody in the group? And I encourage any questions. That's what we're here for. So by no means a hold back, so don't be shy whatsoever. Okay, my next step is now I want to walk through how this looks in action. So I want to be able to verify, I want to be able to stage, and I want to be able to capture those files. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to verify the configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that UI action. And if I looked at my jobs, I could see it's queued. If I go ahead and refresh here, I could see, well, my test is in progress. And it was validated. So this has been a lucky demo for me. So it all happened fast. So it validated. So I connected successfully and it found files. So I know that my next step would be, I want to start staging those files. So I'm going to click on my start staging job. And we're going to see the same to where that staging job is queued. I'm going to go ahead and refresh. So it's starting to import those into my staging. So it processed those files. So what I'm going to do here is refresh my entire record. And we should see the employee document staging. Well, now I see those 2 documents that I showed earlier in my box site, which was Michael Sheridan NDA and a Michael Sheridan verification. And as you can see, based on my configuration, they're both at the ready state instead of draft, just by virtue of how I had those configured in my staging record state field above. So now it would be more of a verification. Yes, this is the document type that I want. Yes, this is the file type that I want. So my next step could be to start the capture job. And this is what's actually going to bring the file over. So if I start the capture job, and I go to refresh my record, so it's still in progress. So my capture job, the stage complete, the last run finished, the files were processed. So if I go back to my staging, you could see now they just went from ready to complete. And just for verification, I could go to my HR profile and I could open my Michael Sheridan HR profile. And as you could see in my employee documents, I now have 2 documents. And if I open the document, I could see the audit trail. So I could see that this document was uploaded by HR admin on this date. So another item, as part of our audit that we're doing on employee documents, we want to know where the document came from. So that's really concludes the demonstration of how this employee document management import works, some of the moving parts of the employee document management in terms of the configuration. So the things to consider are, do I want to import from a URL? Do I want to import from a local drive? What are the benefits of each when you're going to make those decisions in how you're going to bring those files over? I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint, but if any questions have come up from this point, I'll certainly entertain them as I'm going back to the PowerPoint.
I'm not seeing any questions coming through yet, but I'll keep you apprised.
All right, and the last thing I want to talk about before I turn it back over to Apani is some of the tips. So what are we seeing with employee document management bulk imports that we can pass out onto the community? So first is that the bulk import was initially structured for a Unix flavored mid server. So customers are going to have to use the PowerShell if they're using Windows mid servers. So that's something that's that we're updating our documentation on, but something to know that if you're on the Madrid build and you have a Windows mid server, those actions are going to come from by way of PowerShell instead of a Unix shell, meaning Core and Bash, etc. A big one, and I think the simple one, is ensure ports are open for communication. So we're seeing customers that I think more when we're using a local drive, that we have SSH open, that we have all the ports needed in order to communicate. Even with the file transfer, we have some other customers that are using SCP and things of that nature. We just have to make sure that those ports are open.
We just did have one more question.
Sure.
Would you please show where a filter or for file type, example PDF files only, can be configured during import?
Yes, and once I get past these import tips, I'll jump back to the application and show where you can use that filter.
Thank you.
So I'll show that before I pass it on back to Pani. A important item to note is that when you're using the mid server, make sure that the account for the mid server has the employee document management writer role. So we're saying that customers are getting pretty far in their configurations, and not having the role is not allowing the mid server to pass those files during that capture phase. So make sure that that mid server account has that document writer role. When connecting to a local document repository, we're seeing that most, if not all, customers are having to grant admin rights on that local machine, and specific to Windows mid servers that we're seeing. And then last but not least is really just more preparation and kind of making things easier for you is have your employee documents in a central repository. So have all the documents ready. A simple directory structure. So again, if you're traversing, 50 directories deep, it's going to make things difficult. And then have a consistent file naming convention. So if some files you're bringing over as NDA, some files you're bringing over as non-disclose, some non-disclosure, now you have a disconnect or you're having to create additional mappings for the same document type. So it's just going to make things simpler for you on the front, so all of your configurations could fall in line. You can minimize the configurations you'll need because you're following, that naming convention, for example. So before I pass it to Apani, let me jump back to show where we can filter. So I'll go to my import source mapping. And I'm trying to see which one would have so here's the filter regex. So if I wanted to filter by certain document types, I would do it in my import map. So if you're looking to configure and looking to filter out certain document types, this is how you would do it, through your import map, through the filter field and the filter regex. Well, I'm going to now pass it back over to Apani.
Thanks, Mike. Awesome demo, and really insightful so far. I think the last thing that we wanted to call everyone's attention to before we wrap this Ask the Expert session up is just around some of the other training and assets that we have available. So you can see here a number of links. Mostly we suggest stay in touch with the community. We have a huge global customer base that you can interact with, connect with peers and similar organizations in your industry within our community site. And we also have so many different resources that pertain to not only employee document management, but other areas of our overall HR service delivery offering. So have a look, stay in touch. In addition, we're also focused on providing additional assets that focus on employee document management, specifically deployment models and best practice and recommended guidance. So stay tuned. We're in the midst of putting this together, but this will be available shortly. So please do ask your account managers or reach out to us in time, and we will be sure to share that with you. I think lastly, and more than anything else, we really appreciate you joining this call, especially at the time. For us, if you can provide any feedback or additional topic areas that you want to learn more about or have another Ask the Expert session on, then please post that. We want to make this as valuable for everyone here and to answer those burning topics that you want to learn more about. So thank you.
And just before we close, I just want to encourage the community to present your questions. We could all learn from each other. We're noticing that the more and more interactions we're getting on these topics within the community, the more and more customers, the more and more partners, the more and more colleagues are able to learn about the application or learn about certain functionality, and certainly learn about how different use cases are using the application or using the application, meaning the import, in a different way, but still meeting their use case. So I know we have some common use cases. There's some unique use cases, but by presenting your questions, subscribing to the community, we're always, in a constant cycle where we're always learning more and more about all the applications based on the feedback and the interaction from the community. So I appreciate it, and I challenge you to present your questions ongoing so we can all learn from each other.